I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are Velocities in Music. This is our podcast where Tom and I, as two self-proclaimed music heads, get to discuss music, which is why we wake up in the morning, I think, Tom. We like talking about music. We've been doing it for years, and so we decided, after doing album reviews for 4.5 years, we're going to just turn the camera off and just stick to microphones because this suits us a little bit better.
Yeah.
It's more comfortable.
Yeah,
we're
not good looking.
No, we're not good looking. We're also not very good video editors.
No,
either.
we're not. No.
And we didn't care about video editing, and I think the podcast form is just better for us because it's more conversational. Tom, I like discussing things with you. It's nice. Tom, this podcast today, the one that we just hit record on.
Yeah.
I've been looking forward to since we started this. We started our podcast in August. It was kind of just a wild hair idea. We had taken a year hiatus from Velocities in Music, the album reviews we used to do on YouTube, which we stopped doing in August 2014. Took a whole year off and then decided the urge to talk about music was so strong that we had to jump back in it. Started up the podcast, and we were trying to figure out, how do we find this balance between just talking about random music subjects, subjects in music like your favorite duos or double albums or things like that, but also keeping up with all the new music that's coming out, because that's a big part about what you and I do. That's why this started. We were talking about Muse's The Resistance in 2009. Yes. We both hated it. Everyone loved it except us, and we were just talking about that, just ranting. And I remember we were at Jeff's Pizza, and we were just ranting, and people were listening to us rant, and that's where the idea came from.
Yeah.
So not talking about music drove us to talking about music.
That's true.
And the podcast form is simply perfect for that. But I remember, we decided to start recording a podcast every month where we go over all the albums that came out during the month that we listened to.
Yeah, it's been very rewarding.
Yeah, so we started that. We started that in September. So we did September, October, November. We're not going to do them for December because 5 albums came out. And so we have a third of the year or a fourth of the year where we've been covering all the new albums.
Yeah.
But that leaves 8 months of the year that we didn't.
That's true.
So this is going to be this was a really fun exercise for me to put together a best of 2015 list. And I really shouldn't say best.
It's favorites.
It's favorites.
It's favorites.
So Tom, what's the difference between a favorites list and a best list?
So for me, it's all still opinion, but I think that you can have two separate opinions, one that is more objective and one that is more subjective.
Yes.
Now, there's still an ounce of subjectivity to all of that.
Yeah, it's music. Music is subjective.
I'm not talking perfect 100% objectivity.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that it's a spectrum.
Absolutely.
And for me, the difference that makes is based on when I'm putting on my reviewer hat and really trying to pick apart an album and identifying what the things I think a songwriter is doing well in the songwriting, in the performance, in the production, what could be done better. And, not just songwriters, but bands, artists in general, any kind of musical output. So the difference between that and favorite is favorites for me has a lot more to do with comeback quality. So one thing, that you and I have been doing throughout the year, Jake, is we've got this spreadsheet where we just list a bunch of albums.
Oh, man, I love spreadsheets, Tom.
I
really
do. And a spreadsheet about music is just the best, right?
It doesn't get any better than that.
No.
That's my heaven.
No, we just need to find a way to put more complex formulas into it, and I think that you would enjoy that.
Well, that I try to do that.
Yeah, I know.
In any way possible.
But I think that on our spreadsheet for the entire year, we had almost 250 albums that we strived to listen to.
Wow.
I think that's an important context because today we're going to be talking about a very small subset of that. So, it's not to say that the ones we talk about today are the only good albums that came out this year. But anyway, getting back to the whole favorites thing, for me, it's more about comeback quality. There can be some albums that I listen to that I'm like, man, this person's just doing a lot of things right. I really respect their approach. I respect the artistry and the craftsmanship put into these songs, and then immediately after I'm done listening to it, I just forget about it.
Absolutely.
I don't feel that X factor that we talk about sometimes, that extra little push to keep me coming back. Whereas some albums that I'm like, this is pretty good, but maybe it's a little generic. There's nothing too unique or special about it, but something sucks me back in. Something is alluring about that record enough to draw me back in.
Yeah, the more that you and I have listened to music objectively over the years, we started in 2010 and now we're wrapping up 2015. We've been for essentially 5 years thinking exceptionally critically about the music that we listen to. I have found that I now have at least the perceived ability to separate, like I can think an album is good, but not like an album.
Yes.
And that dichotomy is like it's almost like a paradox, you know? Like I can listen to an album and go, wow, this is just brilliant. This is just I can't argue against the fact that this album is just stupendous, but I will never listen to it again.
Yeah. Well, it's the same, you know, I'm trying to find an analogy that's separate from music that maybe people could relate this phenomenon to. And the thing for me is, I think a lot of it comes down to the human aspect of it. And I think just in personal relationships, there's a difference between respecting someone and enjoying being around them.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I think it's the same thing with music. I can respect someone's music, but not want to listen to it.
Right. And you know, one of the things that I learned over the years of doing best of lists when we were doing full-fledged album reviews, we were listening to these albums at least 5 times, and we were doing really deep dives, taking like extensive notes over the different attributes of the sound of the album, and picking out our favorite tracks and things like that, and evaluating the album from a holistic perspective. And when you do that, you're naturally going to think more objectively about it. But the problem is that like these albums are experiences that once you move on from them, as we naturally had to do as we were going to go review the next week's worth of music, it becomes just like a part of your memory, and it just sits there and it bakes. Right, and over time, you know, in the case of Velocities in Music and our end of the year list, it was months. Yeah. Some of these albums, you know, especially the albums that came out in the spring or you know, like January and February, like those albums baked for months, and you might have only come back to them like 1 or 2 times, sometimes not at all, and then you rediscover them in the fall when you're preparing to make your best of list. But they naturally take on a different form in your memory, and your memory can either minimize an album's effect on you, or it can actually exacerbate it. Yeah. And I feel like that's the really important thing to consider when we do these lists, is that these are exaggerations of the in the moment experience that we had. Yeah. And that's and when it's for good, that means an album has really strong comeback quality. Yep. And when we I don't want to say for bad, but when we don't come back to an album as much, it's not because the album is necessarily bad. It's just it didn't stick with us for some reason.
It didn't stick with, and there are a lot of factors that play into that too. I mean, it could be there's always opportunity cost, right? Yeah, right. When you're listening to one thing, it means you're not listening to millions of other things.
Man, economics on a Saturday morning.
Right. I didn't drink nearly enough coffee for this. No.
I did.
Okay, you drank the coffee for both of us. But really, by the end of the year, you know, albums that came out in January, February, March, you've spent so much more time with. Whereas we've had some great albums come out November and maybe even December that we haven't spent as much time with. And how do you compare those relationships that you formed with the albums? It makes it really difficult. Also, you have to consider whether you come back to an album or not is going to be somewhat contingent on what else came out around it. Absolutely. What your availability to listen to music was at the time in your personal life, what season it is, you know, those kinds of moods and the way that they work together. I mean, you know, there are some albums that to me are very much summer albums. Maybe they were released in the summer and that was a conscious decision by the artist, but I didn't listen to it until the winter and I don't like it as much because of that. Right. Like there are time sensitive aspects to this. Absolutely. And the thing is though, man, you know, I am past the point of trying to be just a slave to that. I would rather just say, you know what, I'm just going to listen to the music. I'm going to try not to think about those things too hard. Yeah. Understand that they do affect the way that I, just consciously assess these things, but, you know, it's still opinion. It's still going to come back to opinion, and there's no point in wearing yourself down over these little details.
Sometimes I feel like we tried so hard in the past to objectify it to the point where we could argue a strong case. Like it was a real like legal argument. Right. This album is so good. It's the best. It's the best. And it really, when it comes down to it, when you look at the big, it is just opinion. It's all subjective. And yes, I think we did find, and we still do this because it's just ingrained in how we listen to music now, but where we break it into components and then evaluate those components and think about how those components work together as a whole. It is a way of looking at an album more objectively, but it's still, you're still just componentizing your listening experience, but that's still subjective at the component level, right? So naturally, the sum of all those parts is subjective. It's just a little bit more detailed and granular. So, with that being said, you brought up, Tom, a second ago, you were talking about how, albums that stick with you, when albums that come up earlier in the year, you've had more time with, so you can build more of a relationship, versus albums that come out in like November and December. In fact, spoiler alert, there's an album that came out yesterday that actually made our list, and we'll explain that in a minute. But a lot of music review publications or magazines and websites out there publish their best of lists in like the end of like around Thanksgiving, like end of November, early December.
The year's over.
What's with that? Like, why do they do that?
That has always been frustrating to me.
Yeah.
Because you're just ignoring an entire month.
Yeah.
And first off, there's two sides of it, because while there's the idealist in me that wants to say, just don't do that so that you can take into account albums that come out in December.
Right.
There's also the realist in me that says, artists, if you know that publications are going to do this, why do you release albums in December?
Right.
Just wait until January and be on the docket for next year. And I think that either side of that could be argued. But really, a calendar year is a calendar year. I don't know how long it's taking these publications to put together these lists that they just disregard a full, 8 to 10% of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a pretty significant chunk.
Right.
At the same time, December usually is kind of slow.
Yeah.
But I like to try to at least do those late releases justice, because if we are basing things on a calendar year, that's something I'd want to be, somewhat stringent to.
And it certainly paid off this year.
Yeah.
So Baroness released their layest record, Purple, yesterday. I've listened to it 2.5 times, and I already know that I really enjoyed it. And it's as we said earlier, spoiler alert, it did make our list, so we'll get into that in a minute. But that's why I think we need to wait.
Yeah.
Now, it's the 19th of December today, and we'll probably, Tom, we're thinking we're going to publish this podcast next week, so you guys will get this, right before the holidays. In 2015, and while that may be, we're kind of late to the party, but that's I think ideal for our purposes, for Velocities and Music in this podcast.
It works well. I think one thing that's also worth mentioning is, Jake, you and I think tend to have a different attitude towards lists than a lot of people do.
Yeah. Like, we're obsessed with lists.
Well, we love lists. I mean, we're pretty much Liam Neeson.
Yeah.
Right?
He loves lists.
He loves lists. But
that's why Steven Spielberg casted him to play Oscar Schindler.
Right. I need to link to that video, because we refer to it all the time.
Referring to it.
Okay, yeah. Look in the description if you're on YouTube for that video. If you're on the podcast, I don't know, just look for it on YouTube.
Liam Neeson list. Google it.
Ricky Gervais. Great bit. Anyway, getting back to the point of what I was trying to say, I talked to a lot of people who, well, first off, for a little bit of background, Jake, you and I, since high school, have been geeking out over music and making our favorite albums of all time lists.
Yeah.
I think we started doing 100. At some point, we upped it to 200. And a lot of people that I talk to, when I tell them that I do that, they're just like, how do you do that? Like, I could never make a top list like that. Like, for example, our good friend Quinn. He's told me several times, I would not be able to make a favorite albums list because it changes all the time.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I don't think that's actually very different for people. I just think that their attitude and approach is different, because people are intimidated by that process because they're like, well, it's just going to change. And my attitude is, so what? You do it expecting it to change. You do it, you make a list knowing that it is a snapshot that could very well be different the next day. But why should that stop you from doing it?
Right, and part of it's the fun. Like, you're creating a record of how like the world of music appears to you at that point in time, and it's fun to reflect on that, years later. Like, I still have access to a list I made in 2007, and man, I was really into indie rock.
Yeah, it's a blast of the past.
Right.
You get to see where
it's like
your
a time
taste
capsule, really.
It is. And also just the process, even if you never looked at your past lists again, it's an exercise in assessing yourself and your own tastes. You can learn a lot about yourself, and that's always a valuable thing to do. But anyway, the reason I wanted to loop this back to our end of the year list is because I would say the same thing for this as well. We put this list together. I threw it together, skimming back through albums, figuring out what I like more than others. If I listened back through all of these albums another full time, my list very well might look different. And I think that we just have to acknowledge that these things are subject to change as we grow and mature and our tastes change and our lives change. But that shouldn't stop us from doing it.
Yeah. Speaking of process, Tom, let's put our visor and our pocket protector on and dive into how we actually build a combined Velocities and Music list, because obviously we're pretty detailed in how we do it. So you were just saying that you listen through all the albums. When we listen monthly to the new albums that came out, and we have that spreadsheet. We kind of take notes over the albums, and then another thing that we do is we put just like a generic score, and it's much looser. For those of you who've been watching Tom and I on YouTube do album reviews, in years past, we were pretty literal with the score. The score, like, we don't even talk to you guys. We don't even publish with the scores that we put on albums because they're so fluid. They're meant to just be an initial impression, good, bad. Right. And it's something super familiar that Tom and I can base it off of. And we don't even think it's worth talking about the scores now because that's not what this is all about. Now, what we do is that kind of serves as a guide of what we should go back and listen to, whether or not our initial impressions were, if we like the album or not. So we go back, look through those lists, order them in listen through them, and then order them in the way we see fit. And so Tom has his list, and I have my list, and so we come up with like a common denominator number of albums. In this case, it was 72, 73. Actually, no, yeah, it was in the mid 70s, right?
It's just kind of an arbitrary number.
You're right. So then I reverse it, and then so the top album on your list would get so they said we did 74 albums, so it would get 75 minus 1, so it would score 74 points, and then my album would get 74 points. I pull it into another sheet, do some VLOOKUPs, do some sums, and then we get an aggregate combined score for each of those albums, right? And so from that, we're really taking a mathematical approach to calculating our list. And I love doing this, one, because I love spreadsheets and formulas and being scientific about things, but I also find that it really generates a very unique list that's kind of unbiasedly varied between in balance between our two tastes.
It is, because people have to understand that this list is neither of our individual lists. It is the center of the Venn diagram of our two lists. Like that's how we do it. And it's funny because while we both understand that when we look at our combined list, it's not going to reflect either of ours, at the same time, we always feel like, yeah, this makes sense. Yeah, I can roll with that. Yeah. It's not exactly how I would arrange things, but I think I wouldn't disagree with this. So it's a nice way to do it.
All right, Tom, we've spent a while talking about our list.
Okay.
I think it's time to dive into it.
Let's do it.
How many albums are we going to talk about today, Tom?
We're going to talk through 20 today.
20?
Yes.
So our list is much bigger than 20.
It is.
So we'll publish that on our website, www.velocitiesandmusic.com, and we'll link to it in the notes of this video if you're watching on YouTube. So if you're not, please visit our website. You can see the full list, which I think we'll post probably like 60, 70 albums on that. I don't know. I haven't done it yet. So I'll post that sometime soon, and it'll be a full comprehensive list, but today on the podcast, for time's sake, we're going to only cover 20. So we'll give a brief description of the album, give our thoughts on it, and then obviously its placement too, and then we'll work our way from 20 to 1, and I'm very excited to talk about our number 1 album this year, Tom.
Me too.
All right. So without further ado, let's jump into it. VIM, our favorite album list of 2015.
And we're starting the list with number 20, Odyssey, The Good Fight. Starting it off with a hip-hop album.
Yeah, there's a couple on our list.
Yeah, there are. This one didn't really take me by surprise because I've listened to Odyssey before and really always enjoyed their stuff. But this one, it's more just very thoughtful, very tactful hip-hop music. It's not about being over the top. It's not about high dynamics. It's pretty kind of, middle of the road in terms of your dynamic quality. But it's just so smooth, so well produced, so well performed. I loved the lyrics. They're, as I said, thoughtful, introspective.
Thoughtprospective. I like that.
There you go.
Yeah.
We can make up words.
We do that.
We do that a lot, actually.
Actually, I think that's a really good description, Tom. This, to me, is in the classic vein of hip hop. It really focuses more on crafted beats and production that consists of real instruments like drums, guitar, piano, and bells. I like that the choruses match the level of craft across the sound, provides really tactful, sung, harmonized hooks to ground out some of the verses where Odyssey really works his magic. The delivery is really solid, reminiscent of Dr. Dre and full of attitude. I thought this was just a very strong release overall for the year.
Pettiness, playing games and all. Had a few deals, time out to chill, but knowing when you need space means you feel with love. That's love.
Following Odyssey at number 19 on our favorite album list of 2015, we have Ryan Adams with 1989. This is actually a cover album of Taylor Swift's album 1989, and we talked about this one. This one came out in September, and Tom, we talked about this one. It was very surprising to us because, first of all, Taylor Swift is an interesting artist to begin with, and she I would say as far as pop artists go, commercial pop artists, she's definitely one that I can find myself at least being mildly interested in how she makes music.
Right.
So for Ryan Adams to come along and then craft an album of covers that he makes completely his own in his very intimate, almost like acoustic singer-songwriter sort of way, it's such a delicate way of looking at that album in a whole different light. And it changes the meaning of the words and the lyrics, and it like goes straight into your mind. Like it gets in your head and you can't shake it.
This is an album that I almost appreciate more than I actually enjoy, which I enjoy the hell out of it, actually. But even more than that, what I'm hoping that people are taking the time to think about with reference to this album is that there is such a difference between songwriting and presentation.
Absolutely.
This is something we talk about all the time, and it's like finally Ryan Adams just proved it for me. Like I actually have something that I can refer back to prove this point, because at heart, with the melodies, the chord progressions, they are at heart the same songs as what was on Taylor Swift's, but she presents it in such a different way than Ryan Adams does, and vice versa, of course. And so it breathes new life into these songs, and it opens it up to a whole new demographic of people who might not be able to connect to the Taylor Swift conveyance of these songs.
Right. It's a whole new level of interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really beautiful about it.
At number 18 on our list, we have Deer Hunter, Fading Frontier. Deer Hunter is a very prolific band. They seem to come out with albums every year or 2 years. And coming off
studio albums in between from Bradford Cox.
Right, true, as Atlas Sound. The guy never sleeps, I'm pretty sure. In this one, coming off of Monomania and Halcyon Digest before it, what we see on Fading Frontier is just a more... Bradford Cox embracing life. It's a brighter album. It sheds a little bit of the pessimism of some of the previous Deer Hunter records, but I feel like they're able to do it without sacrificing that kind of dark charm that has always been alluring about the band. They do it with enough self-awareness that it still makes it really appealing and really genuine to me, with just great songwriting and classic Deer Hunter production to boot.
Yeah, I think Monomania was so dark, both from it was so muddy in the presentation, the very distorted guitars, and just the overall sound was just very kind of gritty and dark. And when you add dark lyrical content and vocal presentation to that, it really just makes for a different kind of listen. This is much more optimistic, bright, dreamy, as you described it, Tom. And I feel like the dichotomy between that, because not a lot of the sound has changed too much. A lot of the production is definitely the same, but it just has that bit more upbeat feel to it, and I think it balances the sound out so much more. And I was really pleased with this record. Moving on from Deer Hunter, we have Courtney Barnett. Sometimes I sit and think, sometimes I just sit. Courtney Barnett this is her debut album. She's an Australian. I would call this really indie rock, but it really definitely has a nostalgic feel to it, almost very almost Sleater Kenny or
PJ
Harvey influence, like 90s indie rock. Obviously with female vocals that are really driving the sound. I really found that this was a solid indie rock record, focusing more on songwriting and dynamics than anything else. Lots of guitar melodies, and definitely produced to capture the essence of grunge music. The female vocals, Courtney's female vocals, do a really nice job of balancing out the grit of the sound, and they're really a strong attribute overall.
Yeah, she has a really interesting vocal approach because whereas, some of the artists that we compared her to just now tend to get a lot of rage into their presentation, Courtney Barnett seems to have this like kind of cheeky apathy about her. Like she's someone who would be pissed off at the world, but she just took a tranquilizer to the arm or something,
right. But very 2015.
Definitely. But the way that it contrasts with the fuzziness and explosive instrumentals at times, but also being able to balance that with the really low dynamic points that provide a lot of character and a lot of just genuine qualities, really made this a memorable album.
Impressive as a debut record.
Definitely.
Give me all your money and I'll make some origami, honey. I think you're a joke, but I don't find you very funny.
Next up, we have The Deer Hunter, Act 4, Rebirth and Reprise. Wait,
Tom,
did I just do this one?
I thought we just did this one.
No,
We did Deer Hunter.
Deer Hunter, one word. This is The Deer Hunter.
D-E-A-R. Oh,
He's hunting your significant other.
That makes
apparently.
so much more sense.
Right. Too confusing. All you bands with deer in your name, just pick an elk or something. I don't know. Make things easier for us humble music reviewers.
Antelope.
Right. The Antelope Hunter. Antelope Hunter. Anyway, okay, that sounds awful. Scratch that idea.
These are terrible ideas.
This album is much better than our ideas for band names. It is great progressive rock album. Very hard to describe because it's just all over the place.
Really
but
is all over the place.
It accomplishes what it sets out to do with a lot of tact and just a lot of intelligence. I mean, this is a heady record. You go from the kind of like whimsical fanfare and auxiliary instrumentation that you might expect from an early Sufjan Stevens album to kind of like post-hardcore rock outs at times.
Yeah,
but the production is always sharp. There's a lot of detail to it.
There's even some electronica on this as well. I mean, this really runs the gamut when it comes to just being creative and throwing as many ideas and styles into your music. It's a smorgasbord approach, which a lot of times I personally have problems with, or I have trouble grasping albums that take that approach. I think Act 4, Rebirth and in Reprise really does a good job of mixing it all together and making it one cohesive sound. That said, this came out in September, and I remember when we were listening to this, I had to listen to this several times to feel like I fully comprehended what was going on. And I think that's a compliment to the songwriting and instrumental palette, but overall, it's just something to take a note when you listen to this. This is complex and rewarding if you take the time to get to know it. Next up at number 15 on our favorite albums list, we have Josh Ritter's latest record, Sermon on the Rocks. A couple years ago, Josh Ritter came out with The Beast in its tracks, and a few years before that, Tom and I reviewed So Runs the World Away, and I remember So Runs the World Away was my first exposure to Josh Ritter, and I just absolutely loved that album, was really excited for the follow-up Beast in its tracks, and that album actually was a big change in sound for Josh Ritter.
More stripped down.
Yeah, much more intimate songwriting. Sermon on the Rocks kind of, I don't know, Tom, like I feel like this one shifts back, it's to a bigger sound. It does. Certainly less intimate.
More full.
Yeah, it's more of a full presentation, but he is, like, Josh Ritter is just such a good songwriter, and he exemplifies that on this record, mostly in his Americana craft.
Definitely. And not only does that match the sound, but it matches the lyrical themes. You know, one thing that I love about this album is that it is a complete package. Just in the title itself, Sermon on the Rocks, and then on the cover, he's drinking some kind of what I would assume to be an alcoholic beverage. So you have the kind of on the rocks pun, and then the lyrical content, you get this interesting kind of duality between this kind of like booze swilling persona along with an actual, like, a lot of religious imagery, but it comes back to like this American heartland kind of thing that to me is like what I always wanted out of a Bruce Springsteen album and never really got.
Because it's so much more tactfully crafted. It is. Now, I'm not trying to rip on Bruce Springsteen. I'm just personally not a big fan of the way he executes his sound. I mean, we do that in every podcast.
pretty much. Yeah, it's becoming a staple at this point. But But Josh Ritter, I just feel like captures that emotion and that general imagery so much better. And this album is full of kind of upbeat, more like Tom Petty, John Cougar Mellencamp rockouts, but balances it out with a lot of the more folksy, just roots stuff that you would expect from Josh Ritter. It's a great combination.
Long years studying the Bible, infidels, Jezebel, Salomas, and Delilahs. Back off the bus in your own hometown. Say you didn't like, but then you probably won't like me now. But I'm getting ready to get down. I'm getting ready to get down. Getting ready to get down.
And number 14, we have Panda Bear with Panda Bear Meets the Grim Reaper. This came out at the very beginning of the year, and I remember listening to it a lot when it first came out because there frankly wasn't a whole lot else coming out at the time.
January, yeah. Yours started off kind of slow.
Right, and I got really hooked on this album. Now, a lot of people I don't think really talk about Panda Bear's very first album, Young Prayer, all that much, but Person Pitch and Tomboy come up a lot. Mm-hmm. And one thing that's kept Panda Bear interesting as an artist is that he has constantly changed his sound while keeping these trademarks, right? Tomboy didn't really sound a whole lot like Person Pitch. Person Pitch was a lot more washy. There were longer, more sprawling tracks. Tomboy kept it a little more concise, a little more electronic, and slightly thicker. And I feel like actually Panda Bear Meets the Grim Reaper is kind of a combination of those two elements. It is a little bit longer of an album, but with a lot more tracks. Some of these tracks really take their time to develop. But what I've just found I got hooked on this album for is just the melodies are so catchy. They dig into me. All these songs got stuck in my head, and I found pretty much all of them to be of a very high quality.
I've always favored the Panda Bear side of Animal Collective more so than the AV Terror side of Animal Collective. So I was really excited when this came out, and I listened to it, and I am just an absolute fan of Person Pitch, which came out, I think that came out in 2007. Yeah.
Yep.
And that record, like Panda Bear was just trying to create so much space on that record. It sounds like it was recorded in another room or underwater. It's just, it's very a spatial record. And then Tomboy, which came out in 2012, I want to say 2011, 2012,
somewhere in there.
And that record was just so much more insular. I mean, it was alone. It was aggravating to listen to. And it was a totally different direction. Mm-hmm. This record, Tom, and you kind of were speaking of this, but to me, this record flirts with both of those sounds, and it's like it can't make up its mind. That initially bothered me very much, but I gotta say, listening to this, more recently, I've come up on this album a lot. I know that you like it a lot more than me, Tom.
Yeah.
But I've come up on this album, and the reason why is one thing that Noah Lennox is doing is he's adding these contorted, jumbled intros into a lot of these songs. Usually it's like digital squelches and gurgles, and then these like really beautiful atmospheric pieces, melodic pieces transition in out of that craziness to start with. So you have this dichotomy that balances. The contrast he creates is true, genuine songwriting craft, and it's something I have to respect. So I think this is a great album for the year. For number 13 on our favorite albums list, we have Hot Chip, Why Makes Sense. I am just formally going to come out and say I am a Hot Chip fanboy. Mm-hmm. Ever since we started Velocities in Music, we dove into their 2010 release. One
Life Stand.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tom, because I was totally brain farting there. And then we went back and reviewed their 2008 record, Made in the Dark, which is to this day my favorite Hot Chip record. They've had a number of releases over the last few years that I've just fallen in love with every single one of them. Now, Why Makes Sense is their 6th record, and somehow Hot Chip were able to make their sound more dance-infused than they have in the last 2 records. This record is made to be danced to in a swanky, low-lit martini bar, and I like that they took that attitude and really went for it. It doesn't have a lot of the melody that the previous Hot Chip albums do, and I think that consequently, this seems more functional than inspirational, and it makes me think that it's kind of a step down. Now, because I'm a Hot Chip fanboy, I have not, my bias towards the band has overridden that initial comeback quality or lack thereof that I initially felt, and I've listened to this a couple times, and I've come up on it significantly because I really think that Hot Chip just have a talent for making electro pop feel polished and fresh. These guys are masters at infusing styles like R&B and disco into organic electronica sound. There on a number of tracks here you hear violin and piano and guitar, but it's still electronica, and that is just very unique.
They made the bookends really strong too.
Yes.
That's one thing I really appreciated about this release is the first track, Huarachi Lights, and the closing track, the title track, Why Make Sense, are to me the two best tracks on the album. And so it makes me want to start it from the beginning and listen to it all the way through. And the stuff in between does not disappoint either.
If we come correct, why make sense when the world around refuses? A winner lost is one who always chooses.
At number 12, we have the second hip-hop release on our top 20 list, and that's Logic, The Incredible True Story. This one really came out of nowhere to us. We weren't really familiar with Logic in the past, but a great kind of sci-fi, conceptual themed record, and it takes place in the future. The rapping is perfect. The delivery is terrific. The lyrics are very thought-provoking. And forward-looking as well, I would say, taking a look at society today through the perspective of what things might look like in the future, while also keeping it fun, keeping it fresh, keeping it kind of light, and also just very nimble.
Yeah, we talked about this one pretty extensively in our November album wrap-up, Tom. This is one of our favorite albums from that month, and certainly, it's on our favorite album of the year list, so obviously we really like this record. What I like about this record is, Logic doesn't really rely on easy hip-hop beats and production styles, and he focuses on creating diverse musical backings into his arrangements. It takes a lot of influence from The Roots and Kanye West, which both of those artists are very different. But overall, I just love the sound. I thought his delivery is great. His lyrics, I think, were astute, and I just enjoyed listening to it overall. It has a great comeback quality.
Metaphorical motherfucker to get it in. What a whole well spent for the dividend. But I'm in another system. Everybody hates till they get and they miss them. Why can't we relax and listen? Stop spending money on things that glisten.
Next up, we have number 11 on our favorite album list, John Grant, Gray Tickles, Black Pressure. This album came out last October, and I gotta say, this really caught me off guard just because I wasn't expecting how much I would like this record. It really reminded me a lot of St. Vincent. John Grant, I would call him like an indie experimental artist, somewhere between indie rock and electronica, and at some point we just have to admit to ourselves that those two genres in 2015 have kind of fused together. But an artist who can take that genre description and really bring something new to it, that's something special, and John Grant certainly has that quality. The whole point of Gray Tickles Black Pressure is to create a soundscape that makes you feel awkward and contorted while still providing the melody necessary for many of the songs to get stuck in your head, as many of these did for me.
John Grant is divulging very deep personal things about his life, and that lyrical content really pairs with some of the more grating qualities of the music. But what I like is that while that has to do more with the sound and presentation, he always still approaches it with a really sharp singer-songwriter kind of wit and mindset. And it just makes for overall a very unique and a very enjoyable listening experience.
I can't believe I miss New York during the 70s. I could have gotten a head start in the world of disease. I'm sure that
All right, breaking into the top 10 of 2015, we're starting with Gaz Coombs' Matador. I hope that's how you pronounce his name. He's the frontman for the Britpop group Supergrass, great band, and this is his second solo record. It's not quite Britpop, you know.
I wouldn't.
You can't call it that at all. I mean, it is British rock to a degree, but it's not even like overly British. It's just very artistic to me. Very sharp production, a lot of different instrumentation, a lot of electronic flutters kind of come in and out. But because of those more nuanced details that are present in the sound, it makes this album seem not so like robotically structured. Even if there are some that are more kind of verse chorus type tracks, it seems to really grow and evolve throughout the entire album, and it makes it a very engaging listening experience that I just never get bored of throughout.
Yeah, this came out last January, and so, we weren't actively reviewing music back last January, so I had to come back to this one, and I hadn't listened to it up until this fall. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed this record. I thought, it's indie rock that's not too complicated, and it focuses on melody to carry each song. To me, that's just a simple, traditional approach to making music. But when it's done well and it works, and I believe Matador works. In this record, usually there are a couple of guitars on each track playing clean, repeated riffs, bigger dynamic choruses, which provide really good contrast. The vocals are it's a really nice voice. I assume that's Gaz Coombs, right?
Yeah.
Gaz has a great voice, and his vocal melodies are quite enjoyable. And to me, in one of my notes, I wrote down that this reminds me of early Coldplay. But when going back and listening to this, a couple days ago, I think it's a little bit on the rockier edge of that.
Yeah.
But still, if you're a fan of early Coldplay, this is definitely an album that you should check out. Moving on from Gaz Coombs, we have Youth Lagoon, Savage Hills Ballroom, Youth Lagoon's third record. Youth Lagoon is really the brainchild of one guy. Trevor Powers is his name, and I would classify Youth Lagoon. He really started in 2011. His first record, The Year of Hibernation, was definitely indie rock that edged toward the indie pop side with these big poppy builds. And then in 2013, he came out with Wondrous Bughouse, and I remember absolutely loving that record, Tom, because it was so much more expansive and complex, yet just very, very well written. Savage Hills Ballroom takes on a different approach, and I want to just start off by saying that I absolutely love watching Youth Lagoon and Trevor Powers evolve as a musician and a songwriter. This album is much more stripped down and polished and really focused on the production, but not in a negative way. The songwriting has purpose and meaning, and it's very clear he's going for a desired effect, and he's so intentional about how he creates his music that it just resonates very well with me.
Yeah, seeing the growth of this artist is just incredible, because the 3 LPs he's put out have all been very high quality and sound nothing like each other. You mentioned Year of Hibernation, which is a very minimalist approach. Wondrous Bughouse is the opposite end of that spectrum, where it's full of this psychedelic kind of wash that all just blends together. And on Savage Hills Ballroom, he's taking a very large variety of sounds, a lot of piano, but also some industrial and electronic elements, some grating guitar. But rather than that psychedelic wash that you get on Wondrous Bughouse, on this one, things are a lot more separated. And so it just creates this really panoramic kind of sound, very, very three-dimensional, very just full, but everything is able to cut through the mix with a lot of clarity, and I think that Trevor's vocals are at the front and center of that, to just create a very memorable and unique experience.
Yeah, this was actually my number 5 of the year. I loved this record.
Our number 8 album for 2015 is Jamie XX in Color. Jamie XX, of course, from the XX, taking a little bit of a different approach here, and rather than the more kind of bare minimalist approach of the XX, this is a little more full kind of electronica. But it also incorporates some of the indie pop hooks that you would expect from him. And this album, for me, just carried a lot of feeling in the arrangements, in the performances, really great writing. kind of Moby-esque at times even. Moby, an electronic artist, Jake, that you and I like a lot, so it's no wonder there that we ended up liking this album a lot. But I would almost go out and say, while I definitely liked this album a lot more than Coexist, the last XX release, I think I might have even liked it better than their debut.
Interesting. Yeah, Jamie on this record is somehow able to make his music even more cold and isolated than his work that he did with, as the XX. Tom, I totally get the Moby vibe. I'm not ready to say that this is better than the XX's debut record, which I really liked. But overall, I think it's definitely a strong record, more beat and sample based, which helps the music stay very fluid. And to me, this is just the perfect late night stroll music. The vocals are surprisingly sparse, which I think is tactful because it adds a lot of impact when they are in the sound. Just overall, a very strong record. Next up, we have number 7 on our list, Dan Deacon, Gliss, Riffer. This record came out last February. I remember listening to it at the time and then revisiting it recently. And I just got to say, poor Dan Deacon, the guy is forever going to be doomed trying to live up to his song True Thrush, which came out in 2012.
Great song.
It came out in 2012 on his album America. I think the track on Gliss Riffer, When I Was Done Dying, I think it comes damn close to competing with True Thrush, but probably not quite there. Gliss Riffer is a great album for anyone who loves bands like Animal Collective and the New Era of Montreal. It's definitely electronica, especially with the beats he creates. One thing I like about Dan Deacon is he's able to keep the sound organic enough that it comes off fresh. And Gliss Riffer certainly is more pop and dance focus than America was, but it's done in such a tactful manner that respects his greatest strength, which I think is songwriting.
At number 6, we have the 4th album from Baroness, Purple. Coming off of Red, Blue, Yellow, and Green. Now we're at Purple. We need to start taking bets of what their next album's going to be called. I think, they got Orange left.
Pink.
Indigo. Chartreuse. Maybe.
Yeah. Plum.
But so it's worth noting, this album came out yesterday.
It did come out
yesterday.
December 18th.
Yes, and it's number 6 on our list. We have to address that.
Tom, how is that possible?
Because it's Baroness and they're awesome.
And
that's just how it is.
And they totally placate to our music styles. Like we just, admittedly, Velocities of Music, Tom and I are gigantic Baroness fans. So we are naturally biased towards any Baroness. So I've listened to this 2.5 times.
Yes, same here.
2.5 times. So, and I will admit, like most of the time for an album to make our list, it takes more than 2.5 listens, especially to make it towards the top of the list. But here's the deal. I already love this record.
Yeah.
There's 3 tracks that released ahead of time. The first 2 tracks on the album, Morning Star, Shock Me, and then track 6, Chlorine and Wine. I've been listening to those tracks for many weeks now, as much as I can. And so I feel like I was already kind of familiar with them, and I just absolutely love those tracks. So then the album comes out yesterday, and I listened through it, 2 times right in a row, and I noticed there's several other tracks here that I think are just absolutely genius. Track 4, Kerosene, is one of those, and also track 8, Desperation Burns, which sounds like an STD.
Oh, yeah, probably.
Anyways, I have found myself just absolutely loving this. The instrumentation is so tight, and honestly, it's more complex. This is more of a metal album than Yellow and Green was.
It is, but at the same time, a lot of the sounds and the presentation is very similar. It's more just the way they're putting it together that is different. So this I like as an evolution from Yellow and Green, because I think there was a big difference between Blue and then Yellow and Green. I don't think there's quite as much of a gap here, but what they're doing is going from a double album to a single album here with a similar kind of presentation and sound. They're really just trying to accomplish as much in that shorter amount of time, and I think that they do that really well.
Next up, we have number 5 on our list, favorite album list, 2015, with Braids' third record, Deep in the Iris. Braids is an artist. They're an art rock group. That's what they're called. I don't know why they're called that. They're an art rock group from Canada, and in 2011, they came out with an album called Native Speaker. Tom, that was in our heyday of Velocities of Music. We were doing like 10 albums every 2 weeks back then, and I remember falling in love with Native Speaker. I mean, I think that was only a 5-track record and had really long, expansive songs, a couple of which I just, Lemonade in particular, I found mind-blowing. In 2013, they came out with Flourish Perish, moved away what I would call an electronic art rock sound towards just more typical electronica. Just very melodic, focused on songwriting. That album was kind of cold, and also you could tell that there were so many similarities between that and Blue Hawaii. 2015, Deep in the Iris, this is certainly, I would say, Braids' most introspective, insular, and probably best written record. I would go as far as to say that. I find this album to be just haunting, and really I think it has to do with their songwriting, mostly in that like these compositions are extremely atmospheric. Braids are really, they've always succeeded in creating a space with their sound, but on this one it's a very lonely space. It's very isolated, and I gotta say, like, I feel like the lyrics, notwithstanding, I feel like just the overall music of this record is really resonating with me right now. So this was number 3 on my list, and the reason is and the reason why I can't stop listening to it is because, like, I'm living in this like, I'm at the stage of my life where, like, my job, I'm working a lot of hours. It's a very intense job, and then I leave my job and I have my family and I play with my kid and I have all these things that I'm doing outside of work, and I'm just constantly around people. And when you're constantly around people, I'm an extrovert, so I actually like that, but you have no time to process your own thoughts and emotions. In Braids, to me, in this record, Deep in the Iris, I think creates this soundscape that allows me to just be human and think and be introspective and reflect on my own emotions and my own interpretations of life as it's going on around me. And sometimes I'm not even aware of what's happening, and yet I'm still experiencing these things, but I don't process it until I put this record on. And that is something that's truly special. To me, Deep in the Iris speaks to why we listen to music. Our lives are better when we listen to music, and this album proves that to me.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and it's something I hadn't considered, but there's a lot of music that really brings people together, that allows people to connect, and I feel like this is almost the opposite. This is an album that allows you to dig into yourself.
Yes.
If I was listening to this record in a room full of people, and I started focusing on the music, everyone else would just disappear around me,
right.
I feel like. And that's something that is really interesting. At the same time, though, I think for that reason, it caters to being listened to and digested on your own when you want some time to just kind of sit and think about your life. It has that kind of vibe. And I think that one thing worth noting is you'll notice a lot of the stuff we're talking about that isn't even necessarily playing into how they're constructing songs or what they're doing from a songwriting perspective. That's all still there. Jake, you mentioned that, but really it's about creating a fuller experience. And when music can really transcend that level of just what sounds are being presented, but more about how does it make you feel, what kind of experience does it provide for you, that's really another level.
'Cause we experience the love that we think we deserve. And I guess I thought I didn't need much from this world. So I left you, but you're exactly what I like. I will give you my whole life.
Number 4, we've got Sufjan Stevens, Carrie, and Lowell. An unexpected stripped-down version of Sufjan's sound, especially coming off of like Age of Odds, which was a very, very intricate and kind of fluttering album with a lot of electronic angles. This album is all about just acoustic guitar, Sufjan's vocals, and just a whole lot of atmosphere. There are these kind of like electronic outros and in-between things, transitions, to connect the songs. And it really it gives me very much kind of an Elliott Smith vibe, because he's also got those double tracked vocals that kind of come at you from either side. But Sufjan's voice is just perfect for this kind of unique emotional connection. He has something about the timbre of his voice, something about the quality of it. It's so, when he's doing this kind of whispered presentation, it's so intimate and it's so easy to just feel and get lost in.
It's definitely a more mood-based record too. I would say, this record, one of the major themes on this record is death. Particularly, Sufjan was dealing with the death of his mother, whom, and just reading about this, he wasn't particularly close with. But I think that, as he's writing, obviously, this is a very expressive album. In the lyrics, you can hear tons of motifs around and references to death and how we process death. And that's something that I think that like all humanity can relate to. Like, we all have to deal with the fact that we are going to die, and that people that we care about and that mean a lot to us in our lives are going to die in our lifetimes, and we're going to have to deal with that. And so that's something that I think is just innately human. And the aspect of dealing and processing with death is just such a part of the human condition that, just like we were talking about with the Braids record, Deep in the Iris, Carrie and Lowell really addresses. It's a way of for us to experience the human condition and process these things that we feel and deal with as humans. But back to the music, I really think that this record is a record where Sufjan, his just innate songwriting abilities shines the brightest by making tender, heartfelt folk songs that just have a ton of delicate melodies. Every single song on this album is loaded with melody, and Sufjan has the tact to never push his flamboyant vocals beyond the point that they become annoying or anything more than kind of like a hushed, singing whisper. Nothing about this sound is annoying. So many times I find myself thinking this track is fantastic, particularly the track 4th of July and the track after that, The Only Thing. Just absolute killer songs. As personal as this album is to Sufjan, it's intimately relatable, and I think that's why I just loved it.
In the desert, there's a forest and an acre before us, but I don't know where to begin. But I don't know where to begin. Again, I lost my strength completely.
At number 3 on our list, we have Kendrick Lamar's third record, To Pimp a Butterfly. A lot of you have been requesting our thoughts on To Pimp a Butterfly this year, and it's time to finally give in and tell you what we think. So the first thing we have to address is, why is this not our number 1 record? Because so many publications out there, Tom, are calling this the best record of the year. I gotta say, I want to come out and say, totally deserves it.
Yeah.
Totally deserve this. I have listened to this record since it came out. Came out in March of this year, and I've listened to it probably like once or twice a month since then. Tom, I know you've listened to it more than that.
Crap out of it.
Yeah. And to me, like, I keep coming back to it, not because I felt obligated to, because I actually wanted to. And every time I did, I struggled like collecting my thoughts and writing notes around albums, which really never happens. And I think that the reason is that To Pimp a Butterfly is really hard to put to words. Kendrick Lamar, he reached for the sky on this one. He's trying to do something legendary, and I think he accomplished it. I think this might just be the best modern hip-hop album, period. When reading about this record, it's considered conscious hip-hop, which what the hell does that mean? I'll try to describe it. I think that actually is a pretty astute descriptor, because everything about the sound, from the lyrics to the production to the beats to the styles that he's blending, it's all incredibly intentional. Kendrick's lyrics are very socially relevant and motivated. His delivery is very complex, diverse, and impressive to me. Dr. Dre and the slew of other collaborating producers did a fine job of creating the beats and production on this record. To me, it tries to infuse jazz and funk at every turn while still keeping true to a lot of the modern hip-hop motifs, and it even tries to infuse spoken word. The result, I think, is just a sound that is so unique and a narrative so gripping that it's hard to put to words just what To Pimp a Butterfly accomplishes, partly because we are going to have to wait a couple of years to get full context about what this truly does accomplish.
It's true, and that's something I'm really glad you mentioned, Jake, because looking forward, we don't know how this album will be heralded in future years, but I feel like to be part of the release of this album, to listen to it the day that it came out and throughout 2015, I feel like I was part of something special, because I will say I've drank the Kendrick Lamar Kool-Aid. I am convinced that this will go down as one of the best hip-hop albums of all time. And I really do. I think it's just instant classic quality, and very rarely do you have something like that strikes you as having that quality right from the get-go. I will say this was definitely my number one album of the year. As you mentioned, it's going to be a lot of people's, but it's also divisive. A lot of people prefer Good Kid, Mad City. A lot of people just didn't connect with To Pimp a Butterfly at all. I think that it is an absolute masterful work of art. So I was actually talking to a coworker of ours the other day, Jake, and he was telling me a story about when he was in college, and he listened to U2's The Joshua Tree when it first came out. And he and his friends stayed up because a radio station at midnight was going to play the whole thing straight through. And so they listened to the very first debut of the album when it came out. And that was kind of awe-inspiring to me, because that's such a legendary album now, almost 30 years after its release. But just some college kids listening to it in their dorm room when it first comes out, you can't know that impact. You can't know that. I feel like with Kendrick Lamar, I feel like I know that. I feel like after the second or third listen I gave it, I was like, holy crap, this album will go down in history. And it actually gives me a lot of hope for the hip-hop genre, that this is as popular as it is. It's been nominated for like 11 Grammys or something. And everyone, well, like I said, not everyone, but a lot of people are really loving it. But stepping aside from its impact or potential impact, since we haven't truly gotten to feel that yet, what he's doing with the music is he is just saturating it. So many different kinds of genres he's infusing in here. The opening track, Wesley's Theory, which is, it incorporates a lot of funk into it. You got George Clinton, the bass is really moving. The beat is bouncing. Kendrick is as nimble as ever with his lyricism and his delivery. And it moves to For Free, which is this just fast-paced, moving jazz rap. Then on to King Kunta, which just is one of the highlights of the year for sure. Super catchy track. But, the whole album tells this story. And it also has this poetry, this spoken word aspect that's split out throughout it. And it's very heady. It's very artistic. And I can see why people might turn their nose up at it in some parts, because it is a lot to chew. And Kendrick is really trying to do a lot more in one album than a lot of people would. It's extremely ambitious. And from that point, also, I think inherently maybe a little bit snooty, but I think that he pulls it off. I think it's just one of those high risk, high reward kind of ventures. And another thing that I think it accomplishes is where it doesn't really have any weak tracks to me. There's some tracks that I don't like as much as others, but they still play into the story. One that sticks out in my mind is the track You, which is extremely abrasive of a track. It's not necessarily even pleasant to listen to, but what it accomplishes from an emotional standpoint and in the context of the rest of the record is pivotal. It's really just, it's needed. It's needed where it is on the album to tell that story. And for me, it's just perfection.
24/7, 365 days times 2. I was contemplating getting on stage just to go back to the hood, see my enemy and say, oh yeah, bitch, where you and I was walking. Now I run again, got the whole world talking. King Kunta, everybody wanna cut the legs off. King Kunta, black man taking no loss.
Our number 2 album of 2015 probably won't come as a surprise to many of you. Deaf Heaven, New Bermuda.
This is actually my number 1 of the year, Tom.
And I don't blame you. Our top 3 you could kind of put in like any order.
In really any order.
Yeah, they're just so good. Deaf Heaven, to me, coming off Sunbather, these are just back-to-back masterpieces of metal. and there's enough commonalities between them to show that Deaf Heaven just has a dominant style within the metal genre, but enough difference to keep it from becoming stale. On New Bermuda, as compared to Sunbather, they took a lot of that kind of washy reverb out of the mix. They put a lot more just chugging triplets like you'd get in some kind of classic thrash metal.
Metallica even.
Right, definitely. The drums just drive the entire time. I mean, this album is just... It's perfect.
I knew when this album came out and I listened to it for the first time that this was a really damn good metal record. It's 5 tracks. The tracks are, the shortest track on here is 8 minutes and 23 seconds. A couple of them go over 10 minutes long. But it never feels stale.
No.
It's always, every song is always doing something very dynamic and complex and interesting. And the songs really go different places. And probably the simplest song on the album is track 3, Baby Blue, which is over 10 minutes long. And that starts off very melodic and then slowly builds into this huge climax point, and it has an awesome, very sleazy guitar solo in it. And that's really what I find keeps me coming back to this record, is that this, to me, Deaf Heaven, and especially on New Bermuda, they've become the ultimate metal band. They can do it all. It's progressive metal, it's thrash metal, it's almost post metal at times. To me, these guys, they know how to do it all. And the other side of it is that in something that has been a real journey for me throughout the years we've been doing Velocities in Music, is thinking about the vocals that Deaf Heaven has. The vocalist here, he's a screamer.
Oh, yeah.
It is a shrill scream. Somehow he has the tact, and I think honestly it's a production trait as well, Tom.
Yeah.
But they mix it down low enough, and then he writes his parts in a way that it only enhances the sound. He makes it an instrument that coexists with the rest of the craziness that's going on. The way that this album flows is just addictive. They have this way of creating this dynamic and melodic contrast between just the visceral guitar melodies and rhythms through these really beautiful transitionary pieces. These guys are clearly the evolution of Metallica's sound from the late 80s. And I just absolutely can't put this album down. I listen to it all the time. Every time I ride in a car for more than 45 minutes, I'm putting this album on
Yep.
and loving every second of it. This album to me has just my clear number one for the year, and I'm just in love. I can just gush about this album for minutes and minutes because I love it so much. And at long last, we've reached our number one favorite album from 2015, which should come as no surprise to anyone who's familiar with Tom or my music tastes. We have the new album from Tom's favorite band, Blur, The Magic Whip. Tom, I want to give some background on the Magic Whip.
Sure.
I mean, so many people have asked us what our thoughts were, and we've been so coy about it. Obviously, we like this record. It's our favorite album of the year, but why is it our favorite album of the year?
Well, this album, first off, it was our mutual, each of our individual second picks.
Yes. But mathematically speaking,
mathematically it comes out. But really, once you get to that upper tier, all the albums are just so good. And the Magic Whip did not disappoint. So, a little bit of history here. Blur's last LP to come out was in 2003, Think Tank. But it also largely did not have Graham Coxon.
It wasn't a full Blur
Right,
experience.
the last full Blur album was 1999's 13. So it's been 16 years since a full-fledged Blur release. They've released some singles in recent years. They've done some reunion concerts.
Gorillaz happened.
Yeah, Gorillaz happened. Damon Albarn had solo albums.
Graham
has
Coxon.
had solo albums. It's like they've just been toying with everyone. And then earlier in 2015, they just announced, new album, new single, go out. And then the Magic Whip came out, and I was like 10 years old again.
You were a kid in the candy shop.
I was so excited. But, with that comes a lot of expectations. And I will say at first, when I first listened to this album, I wasn't big on it. I thought it was pretty good, but I wasn't blown away. But it grew on me, and that's the way that Blur's music has always been. And I find those
like
to be
a tumor,
right? Like
a tumor you don't want to get rid of,
right. So this just, as I continued to listen to it, I realized it has all the things I love about a Blur record without retracing their steps. I think it's tough for a band like this to come back and put out an LP because there is a lot of baggage there. There's a lot of history to live up to. You don't want it to sound too much like Park Life. You don't want it to sound too much like Modern Life is Rubbish or Self-Titled. But at the same time, you don't want to go in such a left turn that it doesn't sound like Blur. I think that they achieved that balance perfectly. This is unmistakably a Blur record. You have Graham Coxon's signature, just smooth guitar on some tracks. You have the trashy self-titled /13 guitar on some other tracks, like Go Out and I Broadcast. And then you also have more of the modern things that they've been doing. They embraced the fact that Graham and Damon have been doing their own kind of solo stuff, and you have some sounds on here that sound like they might have come from Plastic Beach by Gorillaz or Everyday Robots, Damon Albarn's solo album that came out a few years back. So it's really, they're not trying too hard to be anything that they're not, but they're not trying too hard to be their old selves. And so it comes out sounding fresh. The songwriting ideas are consistently very good. There's a lot of variety on here. It's just a very modern, urban sounding record. And a lot of that comes too from the circumstances under which they recorded this, just getting stuck in Hong Kong, heads down in the studio, that plays into the album artwork. It plays into several of the track titles, but also just the general vibe of the album. And that makes this an album that is even greater than the sum of its parts because it comes together and just creates this whole package, this whole listening experience. I end up using that phrase a lot, but that's what we're looking for in great albums, is a full listening experience where the songs build off of each other and rely on each other to create something bigger.
And so many of these songs are perfect on their own and even stronger when you listen to them within the context of the record.
Definitely.
Comes down to the songwriting is simply superb. Blur's sound is definitely more melancholic here, more based in art rock than on any previous record.
Yeah.
But as you said, Tom, this is the Magic Whip is just the perfect culmination of all of the members of Blur's respective careers and all of the music that they've done in the past. This is just a different kind of Blur record, as it should be.
Yeah. I really expected to be a little bit let down just because there's no way for me to not have high expectations of this. But really, in the end, I just convinced myself, I'm just happy that they're releasing something again.
Yeah.
Anything. And taking that attitude into it, once I listened to it several times, in no way was I disappointed. I think that while this isn't their best record, I don't think it's an instant classic or anything like that. I do think it absolutely lives up to the rest of their discography and fits right in with it in terms of quality.
It's got to be that time again. And you will be over soon again. So get yourself up, get a pass glitch on your way. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
So overall, for our favorite album list of 2015, Blur is certainly our favorite album.
Yeah.
The Magic Whip is certainly our favorite album that we're going to come back to the most, collectively. We each have our number ones outside of this. Mine is certainly New Bermuda by Deaf Heaven, just because it just rocks out so well, such a well-written record. And yours is what we expect to become a legendary hip-hop record in Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly.
Yep.
This year was interesting to me, Tom, because really those three records shaped the entire year of music for us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for the three of us, like it really comes out to any of those three records you could switch out to be our favorite record collectively.
Yeah.
But I like the way that we set it up because Blur kind of describes, I mean, like they're one of our favorite bands. Definitely your favorite band, one of my favorite bands as well. Now I will say Def Heaven and Kendrick are both becoming some of my favorite artists
definitely
as well. But you know, they need more albums before they'll really be at that level. I need more years with them.
Right.
Tom, what were some of the themes that you saw in our list this year? I noticed,
That's a good question.
I noticed, there was several hip hop records, several high quality hip hop records, and we did cover through our monthly updates this year a number of just very terrible hip hop records. I feel like the hip hop releases this year were either great or not good at all. There was very few in that middle ground.
That's true.
There are a number of great electronica albums that came out this year, a number of great, of course, indie rock albums that came out this year. But all in all, this has been a surprisingly good year in music.
Yeah.
I will say it started slow.
It did. And if I had to look at our list and say, what are the qualities in all these albums that we're really looking for? To me, it's commitment and vision. And those are really vague terms. And to explain a little bit more what I mean, I feel like all the albums on our list, the artist had a clear vision for what they wanted and executed it. There's nothing wishy-washy about them. There's nothing, no spots of these albums that seem to contradict other parts of the albums. It's just a good, clear statement. And really that's what I'm looking for in a great artist. Is just someone who knows what they're setting out to do and does it. Doesn't let anything else get in their way.
Fair point. Now, Tom, whenever we do a top 20 list, the inevitable question that I'm sure many of you out there listening to us right now have is, what about this album?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you list this album or my favorite record of the year on your top 20 list? We want to hear what that record is. So send us a note, Facebook, YouTube comment, email, whatever you guys want. Send us a note and let us know what are some omissions that you see on our list. There's albums that we should have talked about more. And like we said earlier in the podcast, we are going to post our full list on our website, so be sure to reference that as well. But we think here in a couple weeks, what we'll do is we'll gather your guys' feedback on all of the other albums that you feel like we should have talked about. Tom and I will take some time, listen to them, and then maybe cover some of the highlights. The other thing we want to do is talk about some of the biggest disappointments that came out this year, because there were a number of records that I was just looking forward to and then very disappointed by. But that's just a teaser for now. We'll cover that in a couple weeks. Next week is actually the holidays, so we probably won't release on schedule next week, just to let you guys know. It'll be a little bit late, but somewhere around New Year's Eve. Expect to have our next podcast, Velocities in Music's favorite songs of 2015, drop into your favorite podcast listening application.
Yep.
So, with that, we'll conclude our very long but very, in my opinion, worth it favorite albums of 2015 list. Thank you guys, as always, so much for listening to Velocities in Music and participating in this community and discussion. That is why we do Velocities in Music. We greatly appreciate every comment that you put on our videos on YouTube, every email that we get from you at velocitiesinmusic@gmail.com. Every time you visit velocitiesinmusic.com and every time you hit us up on Facebook, we appreciate it so much and do our best to reach out back and respond to you guys. We appreciate your participation. If you want to help support Velocities in Music, we need you to do one thing. Not money, not listening to ads, none of those things. Just share Velocities in Music with some friends or family you think would benefit from participating in this discussion that we're trying to create with you guys. It means so much to us when you guys share, and will help us grow the Velocities in Music community. With that, have a very, very happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and whatever you're celebrating this year. Have a good time, and think of us, because we'll be thinking about you guys. We're very thankful that you're in our lives. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.